The morning Marcus walked into Harrington Tower, the sky above Chicago was the color of old silver, heavy and indifferent, the kind of sky that makes you feel small before the day has even truly begun. He was 19 years old, wearing the only ironed shirt he owned, carrying a backpack that held a library book on advanced cryptography, a half-eaten granola bar, and the quiet, impossible weight of everything his mother had sacrificed to keep him alive and dreaming. He had not been invited. He had not been called. He had simply heard, the way poor kids always hear things, through fragments of overheard conversation, a news segment his mother left on while she mopped floors at 2 in the morning, that Theodore Harrington, one of the wealthiest men in the country, was publicly offering $500,000 to any person who could crack open a biometric safe that had been sealed shut for 11 years, its combination lost, its secrets locked inside, its manufacturer long dissolved. Marcus had done the math in his head on the bus ride over. $500,000 was his mother's salary for the next 22 years. It was his college tuition twice over. It was freedom. If you believe that intelligence has no zip code, stay with this story, because what happened inside that building that afternoon will remind you exactly why. His mother, Dorothy Ellison, had cleaned the offices of Harrington Enterprises for 14 years. 14 years of arriving before sunrise, of polishing glass conference tables that reflected the faces of men who never learned her name, of scrubbing bathrooms used by executives who earned in an hour what she earned in a month. She was not bitter. That was the thing about Dorothy that Marcus could never fully understand and always completely admired. She carried no bitterness. She carried instead a kind of fierce, quiet dignity that expressed itself in small, precise ways, the way she pressed Marcus's school uniforms with particular care, the way she saved every receipt and wrote her weekly budget in a small green notebook with her name on the cover, the way she told him every single night, without fail, regardless of how tired she was, that his mind was the most valuable thing in any room he would ever enter. He believed her. He had no choice but to believe her, because she said it like a woman who knew something the rest of the world had not yet figured out. The lobby of Harrington Tower was white marble and controlled temperature and the subtle, expensive scent of leather and ambition. The security guard at the front desk looked at Marcus the way people sometimes look at something that does not belong, not with open hostility, just with a flatness, a lack of recognition, a refusal to compute. Marcus stated his name. He stated his purpose. He said he was there about the safe. The guard made a call, his expression suggesting he expected the call to end the matter quickly. It did not end the matter. Somewhere upstairs, someone was apparently curious enough to send word down, and Marcus was given a visitor badge and directed to the 42nd floor. Theodore Harrington was not what Marcus expected. He was in his mid-60s, compact and sharp-featured, wearing a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive things fit, like it had been cut specifically to contain his particular brand of authority. He was standing near the window when Marcus entered the conference room, and he turned with the unhurried ease of someone who had not been surprised by anything in a very long time. Behind him, the city spread itself across the horizon like a statement. 3 other men sat around the table, a lawyer, a security consultant, and a man Marcus later learned was Harrington's chief of technology. Harrington looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then he said, not unkindly but with an unmistakable undercurrent of amusement, "You're the one who came about the safe." It was not quite a question. Marcus said yes. Harrington asked his age. Marcus told him. Harrington asked where he went to school. Marcus told him he had graduated early from Lincoln Preparatory, that he had deferred his scholarship to MIT by 1 year because his mother's hours had been cut and he needed to work, that he had spent the past 8 months studying independently, and that cryptographic lock systems were something he had been reading about since he was 14 because his mother had once brought home a broken combination lock from the office lost and found and he had taken it apart on the kitchen table and put it back together in 40 minutes and that had been the beginning of something he still could not entirely name. There was a silence in the room. The lawyer looked at his phone. The security consultant studied Marcus with professional skepticism. Harrington smiled. It was not a cruel smile, but it was the smile of a man who had seen many people overestimate themselves. He said, "This isn't a school project, son. This safe has defeated 2 of the top security firms in the country, a forensic locksmith with 30 years of experience, and a team from a cybersecurity company I paid $400,000. We've tried ultrasonic imaging. We've tried electromagnetic analysis. The manufacturer's blueprints were lost in a server fire in 2019. He paused. What makes you think a 19-year-old kid can do what none of them could? And Marcus, who had rehearsed many things on the bus but not this, said something he had not planned. He said, because none of them needed to. The room went very still. He explained. He said that every person Harrington had hired had approached the safe as a professional problem, something to be solved with equipment and expertise and the weight of institutional credibility. He said that he had no equipment and no credentials and that what he had instead was time and necessity and a way of thinking about locks not as barriers but as conversations, as systems with internal logic that, if you listened carefully enough, would eventually tell you what they needed. He said he had read about this specific model of biometric safe, the Vantec Meridian Series 7, in a discontinued engineering journal he had found digitized in a university archive. He said the Meridian 7 had a known architectural vulnerability in its secondary authentication sequence, a design flaw that had been quietly flagged by the manufacturer's own engineers before the company folded, never publicly disclosed, detectable only through a specific sequence of manual pressure tests on the locking mechanism combined with a timed auditory analysis of the internal ratchet system. He said he would need a stethoscope, a calibrated pressure gauge, approximately 3 hours of uninterrupted quiet, and the chance to try. Harrington stared at him for a long time. Then he laughed, not cruelly, genuinely, the way men laugh when something surprises them against their will. He looked at his technology chief, who gave a small, uncertain shrug. He looked at the lawyer, who said nothing. Then he looked back at Marcus and said, "All right. Let's see it." What happened in the next 3 hours was not dramatic in the way that movies imagine intelligence to be dramatic. There were no sparks, no triumphant musical swells, no moment of sudden inspiration. It was patient and methodical and almost painfully quiet. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the safe, a tall, gunmetal gray cabinet in the corner of Harrington's private office, its surface unmarked by any of the attempts made on it over the years. He placed the stethoscope against the casing at 7 different positions he had mapped out beforehand on a piece of paper. He applied pressure with the gauge at intervals he calculated from the engineering specifications he had memorized. He listened, he adjusted, he listened again. Harrington stayed in the room for the first hour, then left, then came back. The technology chief stayed the entire time, watching with an expression that moved slowly from skepticism to attention to something that looked, around the second hour, like genuine concentration. At 2 hours and 47 minutes, there was a sound, soft, almost imperceptible, the internal ratchet of the Meridian 7 completing a sequence it had not completed in 11 years. Marcus sat very still. He made 2 final adjustments. He pressed a sequence of points on the biometric panel in an order that bypassed the corrupted primary sensor and routed authentication through the secondary system. There was a click, then another, then a low, resonant exhale of pressurized air, and the door of the safe swung open. The room was so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Inside the safe were documents, partnership agreements, personal correspondence, the original deed to a property that had been the subject of a legal dispute for nearly a decade. There were also 2 photographs and a handwritten letter that Harrington took out slowly and held with hands that were not entirely steady. Marcus did not look at what the letter said. He understood without being told that this was private, that whatever was in that safe mattered to Harrington in a way that had nothing to do with money, that 11 years is a long time to be locked out of something you need. Harrington stood with his back to the room for almost a full minute. When he turned around, his face had changed in some way that Marcus could not precisely identify but that made him look, briefly, like a much younger man. He looked at Marcus. He said, "How did you know about the engineering journal?" Marcus said his mother had told him once that the best-kept secrets are the ones nobody thought were worth keeping. He said he had applied that to archives, that the documents most worth reading were often the ones no one had bothered to digitize prominently, buried in corners of the internet where only people with enough patience and enough reason to look would ever find them. Harrington was quiet for a moment. Then he asked Marcus his mother's name. Marcus told him. Harrington's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a small recognition crossing his features. He said, "Dorothy. She works on the 28th floor." It was not a question either. Marcus said yes. What Harrington did next was not in the script of the story Marcus had told himself on the bus. He did not simply write a check. He called his head of human resources and his director of talent development and he told them, in front of Marcus, that he wanted a full scholarship package drafted for MIT, covering 4 years of tuition, housing, and a living stipend, and that he wanted it on his desk by end of business. He told them he also wanted Dorothy Ellison's employment file reviewed, that he was promoting her to facilities operations manager effective the 1st of the following month, with a salary adjustment to reflect the role. He said this without theater, without the grandiosity that generosity sometimes uses to make itself the center of its own story. He said it the way people say things when they have been reminded of something important and are responding accordingly. Then he turned back to Marcus and said something that Marcus would carry for the rest of his life. He said, "I've paid a lot of people a lot of money in this building, and not one of them thought to look in a discontinued journal. He paused. Your mother raised someone who knows that the answer is almost always in the place everyone else decided wasn't worth checking. That's not a skill. That's a way of seeing the world. Don't let anyone teach it out of you. Marcus took the bus home that evening as the city turned amber and slow around him. His mother was in the kitchen when he got back, still in her work clothes, heating soup on the stove, the small television on the counter showing a weather forecast she wasn't watching. He stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at her, at the particular angle of her shoulders, at the green budget notebook on the counter, at the way she hummed softly to herself even when she thought no one was listening. He told her what had happened. He told her all of it. She listened without interrupting, stirring the soup in slow circles, and when he finished she set down the spoon and turned to look at him with an expression he recognized, the one she wore when something confirmed what she had always believed rather than surprised her. She said, "I told you." He said, "I know." She said, "I told you that mind of yours was the most valuable thing in any room." He said, "You did." She nodded once, the way she nodded when a matter was settled, and turned back to the stove, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the Chicago night had gone full dark, and Marcus sat down at the kitchen table and thought about locks and journals and the particular, undefeatable power of a mother who refuses to let the world convince her child that he is less than what he is. Some people spend their whole lives trying to find the door. The lucky ones are raised by someone who teaches them how to listen for the click. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And before you go, tell us in the comments, who is the person in your life who always believed in you before you believed in yourself? We read every single one.